lucky at the beginning of this spiritual journey to have some really good teachers, and very encouraged to kind of go deeper within, into a silence where I could experience a deeper sense of self, a sense of self that wasn't based on, you know, the physical form, wasn't based on the family that I was born into and what happened in that family, not based on anything to do with education. You know, it was a very different sense of self, and we would say that that self is a spiritual self. We could call it the soul, but it's not physical. It's based on understanding myself as the life force that makes this life happen. You know, so the body is, we could say, it's like a vehicle, and the life force is making this vehicle move and operate and animate. And just like you have a driver of a car, you know, the driver gets into the car and he uses the car, but the driver never thinks they're the car. You know, we know that if a driver thought they were the car, you know, we'd be quite worried about them, wouldn't we? But we have kind of slipped into that spell of forgetting that we're the life force, and we can so slip into thinking that we're, you know, the vehicle, the body, and that actually disturbs our true sense of self-worth. So when our self-worth is based on a much deeper aspect of the self, that I am this being of light, non-physical being of light, it really changes the whole way that you perceive yourself and the whole way you give yourself value. And so the second really important thing was to understand that this self has qualities. We could call it the essence of the self. And the essence of the self is incredibly beautiful, already is beautiful. You know, when we base our self-worth on the body and the gender of the body, then we might have to be continually doing things to make ourselves feel beautiful, look beautiful. But the essence of the being, the spiritual being, is already beautiful. It's a being of light. The natural state is peace. The natural state is love, and the natural state is joy. And all the expressions of that, and each being is, in their own right, unique, original, incredibly, you know, precious and exquisite. So when my self-worth becomes based on a deeper aspect of myself, then I'm tuning into something that's much more stable. So when my self-worth is externalized to something external to something in life, then things in life, we can see, they change. They can change very quickly. They fluctuate, they come and they go. But when my sense of self is on, you know, the life force that I am, this being that I am, then I'm tapping into something that's much more eternal, much more stable. Yes, I have to take time out to explore the self, to get a sense of the qualities within the self, and that can be quite hidden under many layers of life experience. But at least my starting point is going inwards rather than going outwards. So this was quite clear to me at the beginning of the journey. You know, within a few weeks, this was quite clear that the journey of the self is a kind of inward journey. Up until that point, I was living life very externalized, and because of that, there was very low self-esteem, because all the things that I put as value were changing. Everything that I thought was important collapsed. So in some ways, it was almost like before the spiritual journey, my whole life kind of disintegrated. And when you haven't understood what's going on, it can bring up many feelings and fears. But now when I look back, I think, wow, what an opportunity. It was almost as everything fell apart, it allowed something new to come, something new to emerge. So there was a point when, you know, there was desperation inside of, you know, what is going on in my life. And then you look at other people's lives, and their lives look so good and so in order, and it seems like everything's happening for them. And yet in my life, looked like everything was falling apart. But now I can see the benefit, because some of those whose lives were in order, maybe not in order now, whereas in a way over the last 30 years, I've been given a very different opportunity and chance to explore the self and to build a self-worth that's on something much, much deeper and much more profound than I was thinking 30 years ago, for sure. So when we tune into this essence, and as I mentioned, it's not that we have to become this. The essence is already there. Just like if you look at a flower, the essence is already there. But it takes a kind of inward journey. And it's almost like giving the self time to stop the externalization that we live in constantly, and to bring the attention back inside and to be with that essence. And we all have that essence, you know, behind the overthinking mind, behind the mind that, you know, exaggerates, imagines, behind that kind of mind, there is natural peace. It's there like a backdrop. But because our thoughts are usually focused on people and things we have to do and places we've got to go and situations, and because our thoughts are often, or for many of us, most of the time are outward looking, then we miss that opportunity of being inside with ourselves. And my experience says that only really when you come back inside, like step back from life, do you get a real chance to really, in a way, sit with your inner self. And when you sit with your inner self, then you can start to experience that essence that it's beautiful, and it's there, and everyone has it. It's just whether the focus of attention is somewhere else. So, and that brings to a big topic, you know, very connected with self-worth is, people say, you know, self-love. They say, love yourself. And I remember thinking, hearing this many times, you know, many years ago, even before 30 years ago, just love yourself. I didn't know a bit of myself to love, you know, but now I have an understanding when, you know, when they talk about love yourself, what are they talking about? They're talking about that inner being. And when the inner being starts to experience its own peace, its own pure peace, and starts to, you know, experience the vibration that comes from that peace, the calmness, the serenity, the tranquility, the quietness, the stillness that comes from that peace, then it's more possible to respect yourself. You start to experience that my truth is that I am a peaceful being. And then there's a respect for the self. When our sense of self is very externalized, and it's about, you know, the body and who we're with and what we're doing, then that we don't always experience good feelings. It fluctuates. But when you come back inside the self and come back to your essence, that peace is so sustaining. It's so empowering. It's so liberating. You know, they say that we have 50,000 thoughts a day. And if we're worried about something, probably much more than that. But how many of those thoughts are just about people, situations, things I've got to do, the tick list? So many of those thoughts are the same thoughts I had yesterday and the same as the day before. But when we come back into our essence and start really appreciating that and loving that, it's like a newness arises in the self, like good feelings. It's like you start to tap into your goodness. And then the self-worth becomes based on that goodness, not on anything outside yourself. It's based on your own intrinsic goodness. So everyone has goodness within them. Everyone has specialities and qualities within them. They may not be displaying it in life because they're separated from it. So it may be that in life, showing up is, negative behavior or negative thoughts, negative feelings. And that just shows that I'm separated from my true self, because the true self is peaceful, is loving, is joyful. And if we're separated from ourselves, we start to operate from all the acquired things that have come in life. A baby doesn't complain, but along the journey we may have learnt the habit of complaining. So as we come back inside and take time to be with ourselves, it's almost like a new birth in a way. And with that new birth of our newfound true self, with that new birth comes a different level of self-worth. It feels like you're basing it on a truth rather than something that can just be there one day, not there the next. Because relationships can be like that. They seem like they're full on at one moment, suddenly they're not there. So whereas when the relationship is with the self, you always have yourself, but others you can never 100% rely on. Even one that we might call our best friend, at a time of need, they may not be at home, they may be somewhere else, whereas we always have ourselves. And that leads me to being a friend to yourself. So they say that you are your own best friend or your own worst enemy. And this shows up in self-talk. And one thing when we're looking at self-worth, we really need to look deeply at self-talk, because the level of self-care will show up in our self-talk. So if we asked people to make a list of, what are the qualities of a great friend, they would say loyalty and faithfulness and trustworthy, like-minded, fun, loyal. There'd be good listener, inspirational, compassionate, non-judgmental. There'd be a whole long list of things that we want as energy coming towards us from a friend. But it's really worth asking ourselves the question of these things that we really want from someone else. Are we that to ourselves? Are we that to ourselves? How supportive am I of myself? How much do I really listen to my inner self and what is the real needs of the inner self? Because sometimes we get clues and messages, we get feelings that say, stop, slow down, take time out, and yet we push ourselves. And how much am I really listening to what the real need of the time is? And so to become a friend of the self is really to support the self, to be really kind to the self. It's almost like we have to become mother to the self. So inside we have a mind, and that mind can be like an unruly child. It just charges off in all different directions. And so there's a part of us that we call the intellect that has to be like a mother, has to guide the mind. Hey, mind, don't go there. It won't help you at all if you have those kind of thoughts. Come back, have these kind of thoughts. These kind of thoughts support you. These kind of thoughts make you feel good. These kind of thoughts are beneficial to you. So there's part of us inside that has to be like the parent. And the mother guides the mind, say, yes, you can do this. You'll be fine, just give it a go. But the mind will throw up all sorts of reasons why we don't do it. You know, it'll bring up the fears, everything. Whereas, you know, when we've got that self-talk that's very encouraging of the self, then that actually creates a very lovely environment within that also enhances our self-worth. When we know that we're treating ourselves well, when we know that we're supporting ourselves well, when we know that we're doing the right thing to enhance our life, to empower our life, then our self-worth increases, like the true self-worth. If we're continually making mistakes, if we're doing things that are negative, if we're thinking negative things, if we're thinking, you know, if we've got controlling natures, if we're, you know, thinking negative things about others, we're never going to have a good sense of self-worth. So self-worth is really based on the goodness that we experience inside and the expression of that. So, so when we can experience our essence and bring that essence into an expression, that increases our self-esteem. So if we're in a situation where we've tapped into that love that is innately inside us, and then that love is nurtured by us exploring it and being with it, and if that love is kind of emerged, then when that comes out, it comes out as kindness and forgiving and compassion and empathy and friendliness. It comes out as these qualities, these virtues that we can use in life. Same with peace. You know, peace is the kind of inner quality, but the expressions of peace are quite broad. You know, so some I've mentioned calmness, you know, when you can be calm in situations. You're not flustered, you're not stressed. You know, you've got this kind of tranquility that feeds the atmosphere around you. Same with joy. You know, joy is the inner quality, but when that's expressed, it becomes good humor, friendliness, contentment, jolly, enthusiasm, motivation. So these, you know, when we've taken time out to nurture ourselves and being with our essence, then these start to flow out into life more naturally, more easily. And it's like the right quality will turn up at the right time. So for every situation in our life, there is a quality that will help us. And when that quality meets as a situation and we ride through that situation without having negative thinking, that increases our sense of self-worth. We feel good about ourselves. We feel good that we're expressing our goodness. And I would say this is what life is about. It's going inside, touching that true essence of the self, and then bringing that into your everyday expression. And that really builds up a really good sense of self. And that sense of self-worth is based on what's true about the self, not based on anything that's of a temporary nature. So I guess from my own experience, in order to do this, you have to become the watcher. You have to become, sometimes we call it the observer, but the watcher of your thinking, the watcher of your feelings. And so, what to do when a situation happens and it triggers something in us and a feeling comes up. And we have to be very alert and watching out for the feelings that come up and see, is it a good feeling that's emerging, or is it a negative feeling? Is it a wasteful feeling? Is it a disturbing feeling? Is it an upset feeling? And to be honest about it, whatever comes up, to be honest with the self. Because if we're not honest with the self about what we feel, then we'll project it back out on the situation and the people in the situation. And then we make them responsible for what we're feeling, which is not true. What you're feeling is based on what's inside you. The situation or the people may have been the trigger, for sure, but what emerges in you is what's inside you. So, and even if a feeling comes up that's an uncomfortable feeling, when we own it as it's something to do with us and make effort to heal that feeling, that will increase our self-worth. When we live in projection, it will never increase our self-worth because it's not true. It's not based on the truth. No one else is responsible for what I feel, for what I think and what I feel. But the illusion could be so powerful that we make something external to ourselves responsible for what we think and feel, but it never is. But to really be able to crack that illusion and realize when a feeling comes up, it's from me. It's from inside me. And to own it and then to work with it. Also, not to suppress it. And some of us have become quite masters at that. Feeling comes up and we might be a bit painful. We can't deal with it, so we suppress it. And, it doesn't go away. It just becomes suppressed. And it's, suppression upon suppression. And eventually the volcano's going to erupt at some point. But also we suppress it by distracting ourselves. We start to do something that takes us away from that immediate feeling of pain. So, we run to the fridge, or we drink, or, we phone a friend, or, we distract ourselves with technology or TV or something, or we sleep, or whatever it is. But we've all found a way where we distract ourselves. But I think if we really want to feel that sense of self-worth, we have to own that feeling and heal that feeling. And that kind of leads me nicely into part of the spiritual journey is about opening your heart. Open your heart to the Supreme Being. And the Supreme Being is always in that state of always peaceful, always loving, always blissful, never fluctuates, always stable in those qualities. So as a being, as I connect with the Supreme Being, there's a kind of connection and an energy flow. And so even these big feelings that can come up, it can almost be like, we call it something like offered to or surrendered to the Supreme. And when we do that, it's like eventually the emotional charge will come out of that feeling. So that feeling might last for a couple of seconds, a minute. It could have triggered something quite deep inside us. This situation could have triggered something quite deep, and we're left with this kind of big feeling that's come up. But I always feel nothing is too big for the Supreme. And if I'm honest about the feeling and I make that connection, I have personally seen in my life things, the emotional charge can come out of it. And usually when the emotional charge comes out, you get some kind of realization about the belief system that's operating in you, maybe the faulty belief system that's operating in you that made that trigger hit that. And then after you've realized that and you've worked out, okay, what do I need to do differently? What do I need to nurture in myself that is different, is like a new way of seeing something, a new way of perceiving myself or life, and that builds your sense of self-worth. You start to appreciate the newness that's coming in you. You start to realize you're letting go of the old ways of being and the new are emerging. And if that situation hadn't happened, if that person hadn't done that thing that triggered that feeling, you may never have got to the point where you surrendered it and got this kind of new realization. So all this inner work builds your appreciation of your self-worth. You start to feel you are someone who can deal with your feelings. You start to realize you are someone that doesn't project and suppress, that you're willing to own the feelings and work with the Supreme Being to heal those feelings. And I feel that when we heal our feelings, with the help of the Supreme, we are helping to heal all the feelings of the world. It's almost like maybe some of us are a bit further ahead on the path, but it's almost like when I do it, it's almost I allow others to do it. So there's others in front of me that have done it that allows me to do it. So it's this, we're all helping each other. And as we heal our feelings, we create a different kind of world. So when there's a lovely phrase that was around a lot when I first came in the early 90s, that when I change, the world changes. So every time I make a personal change, like own my feelings, transform my feelings, that is a contribution to world change. If I'm about to say something and I realize that's not going to be of benefit to me or the other person, and I have enough kind of inner strength to pull back and stay calm, that is a contribution to world change. So even in our everyday life, we can be helping with world change. And that in itself, knowing that by your own change, you are contributing to a bigger change, it builds your self-worth. You're not a hopeless case anymore. You can do something to help the world. So I think that's a great thing to be aware of. And of course, going further on than that, our responses to life. Things are going to be happening all the time, but it's our responses that make the difference and either, almost grow our self-worth or deplete. And I was thinking of these, I was remembering them from before, of these 6 C's, and 6 are positive and 6 are negative, and they really kind of show you in a way where you're at and where you're going, and in a way how much you nurture yourself. So when situation happens, we can do what I shared earlier. We can come back inside and become centered in our essence. And when we do that, then we will respond to the situation from that essence. So it's going to be some kind of good feeling. Often, because we're quite externalized in our thinking and our approach to life, often we're living in a comparison game. So we're comparing ourselves with others. Maybe we're comparing ourselves with what they've achieved and what we haven't achieved, what they've acquired, what we haven't acquired. And if we're in the comparison game, our sense of self-worth is going to be up and down, up and down. It's not going to be stable. When we can center ourselves inside ourselves and be touching that essence, it kind of grows self-worth. And when we become centered, we can become connected with that essence, with these beautiful qualities. And when we start to express them, we feel content. You know, we start to move through life, and even though situations come, you know, it's an amazing feeling when you start to move through even adversity and you keep your sense of dignity and you stay calm. You're going to have a very different sense of self-worth than if you're, you know, commenting about this and commenting about that, and you're complaining about this and you're complaining about that. You're going to have quite a low sense of self. You know, it's almost like you're caught up in the ego game that tries to buff itself up or puff itself up by putting other people down. Whereas when we're centered in the self, we're in more of a self-respect that feeds a very beautiful sense of self-worth. And when we're content in ourselves, we really can become compassionate and caring of others. And that is also builds our sense of self-worth, because when we can be with others, see their needs, help them out, be available, it kind of builds a lovely sense of self that, you know, a value, it brings self-value. And, you know, when we're complaining, you know, and critical, you know, complaining is one level, but becomes critical, and then we become quite condemning of people. Oh, they're always like that. That's the way they are. They never change. When we're like that, it's feeding such a negative sense of self. Then how can we have a good sense of self if we're continually feeding a negative? And then, you know, when we are kind of caring with others, it brings out a creativity. It brings out creativity, and, you know, how can I respond to this? How can I help? How can I be available? How do I cooperate? It brings out creativity in the self. Life becomes a creative process. When we're stuck in the negative and complaining and criticizing and condemning, it's like we become kind of very cynical. And when the self has become cynical, you can't have a good sense of self. So this first step of coming away from the comparison game and sitting in the center of myself with my essence is really the first step to build up a good sense of self-worth, to start appreciating I am a being of goodness. It's the starting point of a journey of enhanced self-worth. So, and I guess another journey that this one's been on is trusting life. You know, when we have low self-esteem, we don't really trust life. We kind of think the worst will happen. But as we start to learn to trust life, to trust that the right resources will show up for what we need, not necessarily want. The right resources will show up. You know, the right people will show up in our life. It's almost like when we start to trust life, everything starts to, we start to attract the best. You know, when we distrust life and which shows up in our kind of complaining means I don't trust life. You know, when we trust life and just know that, have this knowing that wherever I am will be okay, I will be okay, things will be okay. It's a very beautiful way to live. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be much, might not have loads of resources, but what is available will be perfectly fine for that situation. And I had experience in January. A relative was quite unwell in hospital, and this relative has complex needs since a baby, had an illness and has quite complex needs, so needs one-to-one care. And it was Christmas, then New Year, and COVID was still around. The hospital went into a lockdown. So really, for most of January, I was in this one hospital room. But I remember thinking years before that, you know, even if I was stuck somewhere, I always know that I can use my mind to go different places, like beyond this world, or, you know, remember my qualities or think good things. And I suddenly realized, you know, I was in this room that, and when it was in lockdown, you couldn't even go out of the room. They would bring whatever you needed. If you wanted water, hot water, they would bring it to you. And they'd be all masked up. And so it was kind of an interesting situation that actually, I looking back, I feel it really increased my sense of self, because I knew that I wasn't trapped in that situation. You know, if I hadn't had this spiritual practice and you're in a hospital room for day and night, and you could easily go down with it. But I found that because there's this capacity, this spiritual practice, and the ability to use the mind in, you know, for goodness, I actually enjoyed the situation. I enjoyed you know, when the doctors came in, the nurses came in, and sometimes they would come in and have a chat, and, you know, it was perfectly fine. And I think the spiritual practice, this ability to go into our essence, means that we can have experiences that are quite different than what's going on outside us. So even though the situation may be one thing, we could be having beautiful feelings inside. So, and I guess the last thing that taps into is, it was very clear to me that happiness is our own responsibility. We've always told this, that happiness is, you know, a daily decision, but it really is our own responsibility. No one else is responsible for our happiness, but we can so easily put it outside ourselves and make a person, or being with a certain person, that person makes me happy, therefore I want to spend lots of time with them. And we sort of abdicate responsibility for our own happiness. And I certainly did that in the past. It was like, you know, certain people were very humorous, so it was easy to be around them because they made you happy. But they may not always be there. They may not always be in your life. So, you know, this feeling of I am responsible for my own happiness and making effort for my own happiness will increase self-worth. It's like I become self-sufficient. You know, I've got peace inside me, I've got love inside me, I've got joy inside me. Everything that ever wanted to experience is inside me. And that gives an amazing sense of self, that I'm self-sufficient. Might not have much, might not be many resources, but what's inside will sustain. So this is my sharing, and I think that there is maybe a chance for questions. Just going to have a little sip of water.
Thank you. Yes, I just, you know, I loved everything that you talked about. I've talked about this probably for about a year now in Brahma Kumaris when I come. I am struggling with the happiness thing. I completely get what you're saying, but I've talked about it for a lot. I spend a lot of time with my mum, who is poorly, and I've taken on board lots of advice from the talks over here. No matter what I do it with love. And I know that my mum is 95. I know that my mum has had her journey and whatever. But I've just spent 9 days with her. It's very, very difficult with my sister. I have nothing to do with her. She's been horrendous. So that is difficult. But I spent 9-10 days with Mum, and I do feel absolutely exhausted because emotionally, I just find it so incredibly hard to see her struggle and maintain my happiness. I know that they can be two separate things, and I really try and look at, you know, the fact that I've had this extraordinary woman in my life for so long, and you know, she still can smoke her cigarettes and watch television, and she's in her own home, and try and look for all the positives. But I think I'm affected even more than I realise. So I really do find that it's just a sadness of watching her struggle, because she really isn't. You know, you can see it in her face. She's very bright. I mean, she's as bright as a button, but I can just see that. And so I struggle to maintain my happiness around that.
Yes. Yes, it is challenging, isn't it, when we see others in front of us struggling, and I think we have to, you know, I think it's brilliant that you're actually being honest with yourself, there is. But I think there's another way we can look at it, that, you know, and it's not that you have to be there and all happy clappy, but if you can, you know, as you're saying, you know, she's had a good long life, and to be so appreciative that you have had someone in your life that long. You know, many don't have parents that long. But I think it's something about creating an atmosphere. It's realizing that whatever is going on inside you is creating an atmosphere when you're around her. So when you're around her and you're calm, that is helping to create the atmosphere. When you can do things with her that bring joy, that is creating the atmosphere. Whereas when we're there and we're worried, or we're fearful, or we're fearing their struggle, or we're fearing that we're going to lose them, because that's probably all in there as well. You know, that's creating its own atmosphere. So I think it's like when you go visit, go there with a feeling that you would like to create a lovely atmosphere.
I do that. I mean, I make it very joyful. It's usually after I put Mum to bed, or when I come back to my own flat.
Yes, yeah.
But while I'm there, I do everything, and she smiles.
Yes.
She smiles a lot. She says to me, you know, I'm so grateful for you. So while I'm there, I get her to do, you know, we do joyful things, and as I say, I'm joyful around her. It's just my own stuff when I come away.
I think hard. That bit of I mentioned, you know, being aware of your feelings, being honest about your feelings, but take it to the Supreme, you know, to build that relationship and be honest. You know, these are the feelings I'm having. And I remember when we're talking 30 years ago, and I remember having this conversation with the Supreme Being, saying, you know, I'm a bit frightened of my mother dying. I knew I was fearful of my mother dying. And it's almost like I started to feel almost that presence as a kind of mother, another mother, you know? And I've had that mother for 30 years, just like you. I've been very fortunate. So even though 30 years ago I was saying, one is that being started to become my mother, you know, like a support, but also I've also been given the opportunity to work through everything. So again, it's appreciating the chance you've been given, you know, and brilliant that you can go there and be joyous. And I think that's probably going to be the way. When you're there, and when you come away with it, you'll have to deal with some of the deeper feelings about it. And I think you just have to accept that and work with them and hand them over and be honest about them, really. Yeah.
There's a question from an online viewer, and the question is quite similar, but I'll just read it out. It says, can self-love be diminished with anxiety, mental health? Question mark.
Can self-love
be diminished with anxiety or mental health?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I think it's when we're really sort of feeling good about ourselves and expressing our goodness, that's when we will feel a real sense of self-worth. It's that inner goodness being expressed that really, we could call it, builds the self-esteem and the self-worth, that I am a being of goodness, you know? And when we have anxiety and fears, that's usually based on something in the external. It could be something that's from childhood, something about the traumas we've been through, but they have come from the external world. And so as we take time to come back inside and be with ourselves, and I would say so essential to build this relationship with a supreme being who's so full of peace and unconditional love, that unconditional love and the blissfulness, that when we can experience that, it heals so much inside us. As I mentioned, when I first came, probably lots of fears and anxiety and stress and all sorts of stuff. So, you know, because of that building that relationship of a friend, a mother, it's almost like that being can be anything to us, you know, and that I feel has probably been the greatest healing. First, getting in touch with my own sense of self, that's been a real healing experience, but also the relationship with the Supreme, that's probably those two things together have increased the self-worth tremendously. I can't compare with what it was before. Didn't exist, I don't think.
Thank you for the answer, Margaret. And there's another question from our YouTube viewer. And they say that there is a stigma still present in the society of being a single parent or a divorcee. And in such situation, when there's an awareness and you know that people are looking at you with that stigma or looking at you differently, how do you manage your self-worth?
Yeah, so that's still externalizing your self-worth, isn't it? It's based on being one parent, or it's based on being something, and it's something that relates to things. So I think it's about, again, building up that experience of coming back inside, and you are that life force. You're not a single parent. These are just labels, aren't they? Any stigma is about a label, but don't label yourself. Come back inside, be centered in the self, build up your self-worth based on you are that living being, that beautiful being that has such a beautiful essence, and build up your self-worth on that. And then once you really know who you are, it won't matter what anyone else says. It won't bother you. But while we're still slightly externalized, it will bother us. So it's maybe a call to this person who's asked the question, maybe it's a call to you to come back inside and build up your sense of self on something completely unrelated to that.
Can you go beyond your...
I don't know if you need the mic so they can hear.
Sorry. My question is, can you go beyond your comfort zone and still feel good about your self-worth? So for example, say if you're like, I wouldn't say overworking, but going beyond how much you can work, right? And you're trying to test your limits, and all of a sudden you think, can I make this happen? And you do, but then you think, your mind just keeps saying, it's enough, you need to stop here, but you just keep on going. Can the mind and the consciousness expand?
I think there's two things here. So one is, breaking through boundaries. We can put self-limiting boundaries on ourselves. And to push those boundaries a bit is quite good. It's healthy, isn't it? Otherwise, we never grow. Sometimes we have to take good, sensible risks, maybe put ourselves in situations we've never been in before and see how we get on, just like I was in that hospital situation. I've never had to do that before. But I saw a potential in the self. It gave an opportunity to the self. So that's a very healthy thing to do, to kind of expand my horizons and, increase my skills and increase my growth. But on the other side, not to become where I push my boundaries and there's something saying to me, stop now, and then I keep going further. We've got to know if it's a positive thing or becoming a negative thing. Where we wear ourselves out, or we can get addicted to, like they call it, workaholics. You get addicted to, feedback. You're doing something because you want the feedback, where that's a very different sense than doing something to expand yourself, grow yourself.
I think there's a last question before we head on to meditation. Sometimes we appreciate the self-worth based on our perceived identity rather than our real identity. How do you manage to draw that thin line and find the difference between what is my perceived identity and am I really respecting myself for who I am or what I am?
I mean, what you've said is it is the journey of self-discovery, isn't it? As I mentioned, this is not necessarily an overnight, I've got it now. It is a journey, and as we journey through life, even though we might have taken time out to come back and be with our essence and be it, the ego is so clever that it can wrap itself around anything. Any achievement or, any sense of self. So I think it's part of the journey to start discerning what is the true self, and what is when it's going off and the ego's got hold of it and taking you out. So it's journeying. But the one thing that I notice is that when you really have kind of touched that essence and you're exploring that essence and you've got a sense of being with that essence, it brings quite a deep feeling of contentment because you're sustained from inside yourself. When the ego is off on its journey, and that happens, it happens to me, it happens to us all, there's a kind of feeling of easily getting disturbed. We'll want certain things to be a certain way, or we have desires for things to be a certain way. We'll want people to be a certain way. Whereas when we're really in touch with our essence, we start to be able to move through life and stay content, and those situations come and go, people come and go. There's this kind of more stability, I think. So, yeah, it is a continuous journey of self-discovery, and right until the moment of leaving this particular part of the journey, you always have to be on the alert for whether it's based on my self-worth is based on true self-respect, or is there some ego in it? That is the spiritual journey. And more you get a sense of the good feelings that come up when you are connected with your essence, when you are connected with your truth, and you'll start to get a sense of the sort of things that show up, the sort of patterns that show up or the sort of thoughts that show up when you're not really in your essence. And that's going to be the watcher. Yeah, the watcher. So let's just have a few moments of reflection. Let's just take these few moments to come back inside and be with ourselves. We can see ourselves as a beautiful being of light, the life force that sits behind the eyes. And the true essence of that being that I am is peace. Peace is always there. It has always been there, and it will always be there. It's innately there. It's just that there needs to be a focus inside in order to experience it. When my thoughts are always running outside, often I can be separated from my own sense of peace. This peace is precious. It brings a sense of reality, a realness. This peace is stable. And when I can connect with that Supreme Being that's beyond this world, beyond any fluctuation, being that's ever peaceful, when I connect with that being, when I connect with that profound peace, my own peace gets enhanced. I'm now connecting with a being who's always stable, and that increases my own stability. Sometimes we lose our peace quickly with trivial things. But when I realize that peace is my true nature, my real essence, that peace is my power, it's my refuge, then I start to act in a way that protects and enhances this peace. Peace is always there. It's just coming back inside and being in my own peace, experiencing my own inner calm, my own serenity. Om Shanti, Om, I am, Shanti, peace.
Same time, same place, and the topic is rising above little thing. Rising above little thing. So everybody's welcome to that. Once again, thanks for joining us.